there are a lot of curvature. So like when you have these curved areas, you don't want rigid like geometric line making on there. A lot of those decisions just come from like the shape that I want, the feeling that I want. If I want something to look soft, then I want to make a little flick motion. And if I want something that's a wood grain, then I will be more inclined to do longer lines rather than short lines. So it's something that I might see just based on like a reference, just how this object is created. If I already see lines on it, I try to mimic that. So it's a blend of me doing a lot of sketching prior.
Well, I noticed that there's a couple of areas in your drawing where you're making these radiating lines, almost like a fan, but then you also have some sections where it's just parallel lines.
I want to address the shape of the form, and then sometimes I want to address like the depth of the form.
You vary the lengths of your lines a lot.
Most of it is really visual variety. It really establishes the flow of a form. The tree trunk had those like linear lines, have that swooping motion. So having short lines will really disrupt that flow. As far as like control goes, definitely shorter lines are easier. Just having line width vary in one long flow line can really add character. Definitely having some curve, following the contour of the form makes the object more real, like more tactile. If you have a geometric lines on something that's really delicate and spherical, you can still do it, but then it just adds a lot more like beauty if you have some contouring, like curved lines that follow that form. There's just like an effortless feeling to something that has a defined shading characterized by its form instead of just having a generic shading technique applied to it. In this one, I didn't really need like one giant form to hold everything together, but I did have some like basic shapes to ground it. So like this mushroom like shape, and then weaving in like different coral forms, like different textures in between it, make sure like the object isn't taking over too much space.
I noticed that you used a really specific pattern of cross hatching in the background that's really different than the objects. How did you learn how to do that technique?
So in college, I took a pen and ink and sketchboard class, and one of the references the teacher encouraged us to use was manga. So this one in particular is called Naoyami. So going in like almost a sinuous form, like a snake, and then weaving a snake kind of curves together, you have a very beautiful like warping look in the back.
It almost looks like the pattern of a basket that's been woven. And I also feel a little dizzy looking at it. Is that on purpose with this technique?
In this case, I am creating like one like flowing line, like a single like direction hatch mark, but just in a curved direction, and then weaving those together. So it does have like a whirlpool effect. I grew up reading manga. It was just beautiful artwork, really interesting storytelling, and really dynamic lines. Manga is just great because these are masters at their craft. Like they've been doing this for decades and they are creating stories with it. So it's such an important tool. It's so entertaining for children to kind of pick up and read. So it also taught me that you could get a reference book. You could learn from so many different sources. It doesn't have to be an art textbook. I don't need to be hyper realistic on every aspect. There are areas of focus that I really want people to look into the detail, but then there's some areas that are fillers. I need to have some areas where the viewer can rest their eyes.
I think you and I both know that you totally have the skill to draw every single tiny pore in that mushroom. But the thing is, the fact that you choose to not do that, I think really helps you a lot because you're picking and choosing. You're not just going on automatic pilot and say, oh, I saw it, I have to draw it. You're being very selective. I really was not expecting you to put pencil over the pen.
I like to use the pencil to almost blend a lot of my ink marks. Graphite is also a very interesting way to just add a drop shadow or blend in some shades and push some areas back. It's almost like a blur filter. And I was just coloring the graphite over my pen marks. I kind of treated this as like my last step. If I wanted to add on top of graphite again, that might require a different medium or like the pen might get clogged from the graphite. Really reserve that step for last.